This lecture was prepared for the sesquicentennial of the IXL Lime Company, which manufactured lime on Fall Creek during the last quarter of the 19th century. This talk was organized by the San Lorenzo Valley Museum and is co-sponsored by the Friends of the Cowell Lime Works Historic District at UC Santa Cruz and Researchers Anonymous. It is dedicated to the memory of Bob Pawarzik, who spent many years researching the history of the area's lime industry. He was a co-author of the book Lime Kiln Legacies, The History of the Lime Industry in Santa Cruz County. Bob especially enjoyed hiking and studying Fall Creek, and did this guidebook in 1997. It remains a source for a lot of good information on the history of the site. Fall Creek is located near the town of Felton in Santa Cruz County, California. It's a few miles north of Santa Cruz and about 70 miles south of San Francisco. Today, the old lime kilns at Fall Creek are blanketed by moss and ferns. They are a popular hiking destination. Where workers stoked the fires and packed lime into wooden barrels, five-fingered ferns now grow, and banana slugs creep along. For well over a century, nature has slowly been reclaiming the land. Lime is a compound made by taking limestone or marble and heating it in a kiln. This causes the main component of the rock, calcium carbonate, to convert to calcium oxide, or lime. Carbon dioxide gas is given off in the process. Lime has hundreds of uses, but most of the lime manufactured here was used in construction. It was mixed with sand and water to make mortar and plaster. So it was an essential ingredient in making brick buildings, fireplaces, and chimneys. The pillars under the historic Cooperage building at UC Santa Cruz were made with lime mortar and are still standing. Before the widespread use of sheetrock starting in the middle 1900s, interior walls were commonly finished with lath and plaster. This is the inside of the Cardiff House at UC Santa Cruz when it was renovated in 2015. You can see the lath and you can see the layers of plaster. Lime was also mixed with water to make whitewash for finishing the exterior of buildings such as barns and sheds. It protected the wood and was cheaper than paint, but it had to be reapplied every year or two. Santa Cruz was at one time the most important lime producing area in California. It was Santa Cruz lime that helped build San Francisco in the decades after the gold rush. One of the reasons for this is that the rock here is of very high quality. It is around 97 to 98% pure calcium carbonate. This made for very high quality lime. There was also a plentiful supply of wood for fuel. Redwood was used, split and cut into 8-foot lengths. Here, a team of oxen hauls a load of redwood. Santa Cruz was also close to the market of San Francisco, only a day or two from San Francisco by schooner. In this view from the early 1870s, you can see two wharves in Santa Cruz with ships taking on cargo. Outcrops of lime rock occur at several locations around Santa Cruz County, all in the southern part of Ben Lomond Mountain. Here you see the old quarry at UC Santa Cruz, now an amphitheater. At Fall Creek, the quarry is mostly hidden now, covered by soil, leaves, and vegetation. This map shows the distribution of the various outcrops of lime rock. In this case, the rock is in the form of marble. Fall Creek is up at the top on the right. The lime rock originated as the shells of sea animals that lived many millions of years ago. Thick deposits of seashells, mud, and sand built up in layers on the ocean floor. The seashells, sand, and mud were buried deep in the Earth's crust, where they hardened into sedimentary rock. The seashells became limestone, the mud became mudstone, and the sand became sandstone. Over time, the rock was exposed to further heat and pressure, and the rocks changed into marble, schist, and quartzite. These are metamorphic rocks. Eventually, the metamorphic rocks were uplifted and exposed on the surface where we find them today. The first company to go into the lime business on a large scale in the Santa Cruz area was the firm of Davis and Jordan. They started in business in Santa Cruz in 1853. You'll notice on this advertisement that, among other things, they sold hair. The lime companies had an interesting relationship with tanneries. The tanneries used lime water to soften the hide so that they could remove the hair. The lime companies then bought the hair to sell to people who did plastering. These people added the hair to the plaster to give it tensile strength. The firm of Davis and Jordan later became the firm of Davis and Cowell. It is the Cowell name that is especially well known today, and Mr. Cowell later took over the IXL Lime Works. From 1858 to 1869, Samuel Adams made lime west of Cave Gulch in what is now part of Wilder Ranch State Park. Davis and Cowell bought out Adams in 1869. Thomas Bull and Eben Bennett began making lime near Felton in the middle 1860s. Bull had a lime kiln next to what is today called Bull Creek, and Bennett had a kiln on what is today known as Bennett Creek. They took advantage of the newly constructed road to Santa Cruz, now Highway 9. In fact, Bennett helped oversee construction of the road in the middle 1860s. Several of Bull and Bennett's kilns have survived. This is one of the Bennett kilns, located on what is now the San Lorenzo Valley Water District property. Both companies were later taken over by Henry Holmes, and the Holmes Lime Company survived into the 1930s. Although we are marking the 150th anniversary of the beginning of production in 1875, the IXL Lime Company was incorporated in the fall of 1874. Among the early investors were Farnham Seeley, Isaac Bloom, Abraham Blockman, Moses Cerf, and E.L. Williams. They were a mixture of San Francisco and Santa Cruz County investors. Work on construction of the kilns, roads, and other facilities took place during the winter of 1874-1875. The cost was around $18,000 to $20,000 to get the business started. The first batch of lime was made in April 1875. Blockman and Cerf were San Francisco commission merchants. This ad from 1880 shows IXL Lime being sold in Oakland by an A. Cerf, no doubt a relative. Isaac Bloom was a prominent Santa Cruz merchant with a general store in the Flatiron Building at the head of Pacific Avenue. The company had two kilns, one with a 1,150 barrel capacity and the other with a capacity of 750 barrels. The kilns were named Sunrise and Jacob, the latter being named for Bloom's 8-year-old son, who had the honor of lighting the very first fire in the kiln. E.L. Williams worked in the real estate and land title businesses and held several positions in Santa Cruz County government, including undersheriff, deputy county clerk, and deputy assessor. Williams was Santa Cruz County's first historian. In 1876 and 1877, he wrote a history column for a newspaper called The Local Item. The column was titled A Peep into the Past. After the first batch of lime was made, the investors and their friends held a big celebration at the lime kilns. E.L. Williams offered this toast: "There cannot be given too much credit to Mr. F.D. Seeley, the former owner of these lands, containing such a bonanza of limestone, for his assistance in bringing about the present success of the company, nor to Mr. I. Bloom for his care in looking after the numerous details connected with the work, nor to Mr. McDonald, the foreman, for his skill, experience, and tact. I have therefore to propose to the health of the gentlemen named, like the overburnt limestone in the arches of the kilns, may their success and consequent prosperity never slacken." After dinner, the IXL Concertina Band played. IXL means I excel, and was a name used for companies and products more commonly in the 1800s and early 1900s. Here you see an ad for an early furniture company in Santa Cruz, an ad for IXL Roof and Barn Paint, and an ad for IXL Bitters. This envelope, addressed to the IXL Lime Company and delivered by Wells Fargo, probably dates from the late 1870s or early 1880s. I should explain that the kilns there today are not the originals. There are 3 identical kilns today instead of 2 of different sizes. More about this in a moment. Over the next year or so, additional facilities were built, including a cooperage for assembling barrels for shipping the lime, and a warehouse. This map by Bob Powarzik shows the location of various structures in later years. There were also cabins for workers, but these are off the map. It was like a little town. It was no coincidence that the Santa Cruz and Felton Railroad was under construction at the same time the IXL Lime Company was being established. This would provide more easy access to ships in Santa Cruz. Here you see a narrow gauge locomotive at the Holmes Lime Company just south of the IXL. The large kilns are on the left. There are several steps in making the lime. Unfortunately, there are not very many photographs, in fact hardly any, of the IXL Lime Company. So I'll be using pictures from other Santa Cruz area lime companies taken in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Step 1 was to quarry the rock. Explosives were used to bring down boulders, which were then broken up with sledgehammers into rocks about the size of a soccer ball. The next step was to haul the rock to the kilns. Here you see workers for the Holmes Lime Company putting the rock into an ore car, which was pushed or pulled to the kilns. There was a very similar setup for the IXL Lime Company. Step 3 was to load the rock into the kiln. The kilns were loaded from the top, and the rock stacked very carefully with larger rocks on the bottom and smaller ones towards the top. Here you see a partly loaded kiln from the inside. Notice that a pathway with no rock was left behind the doorway. This is the beginning of the firebox. This view is looking through a doorway into a kiln that was never fired. This firebox was created by stacking the rock to form an arch. Altogether, it took 2 days to load the kiln. Step 4 was to fire the kiln. The burn took about 4 days and was monitored continuously with fuel added as needed. The temperature had to be kept at around 17 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. As mentioned earlier, they used split redwood for fuel. Each piece of redwood was about 6 to 12 inches by 4 to 8 inches by about 8 feet long. The fuel had to be added every so many minutes to keep the fire burning at a constant temperature. Making lime took a great deal of expertise. They had to be able to control the draft by opening and closing the kiln doors, and they had to make sure that they didn't overburn or underburn the rock. Altogether, the burn took about 4 days. This stack of unused cordwood could still be seen near the Fall Creek kilns in the early 2000s. When the load was judged to be done, the kiln had to cool for about 2 days. The lime was unloaded from the kiln through doorways at the front and packed into wooden barrels. Unloading the kiln also took about 2 days. The barrels were also made out of redwood and were assembled at the cooperage near the kilns. They used hazelnut wands for hoops. Later, steel hoops were used. The next step was to take the barrels of lime and haul them to the warehouse next to the railroad in Felton. Here we see a similar scene in Santa Cruz. The barrels of lime were loaded onto ships, sailing ships, and shipped as far away as Oregon or as far south as San Diego. At one time, Santa Cruz had 3 wharves. This map from 1879 shows the shipping route from Santa Cruz north to San Francisco with the various stops along the way. By June 1875, the company was producing 400 barrels per week. The lime was used to put finishing touches on the new Palace Hotel in San Francisco, which opened in October of 1875. At 755 rooms, it was, at that time, the largest hotel in the western United States. A year after the Lime Company opened, the company was working 25 men and running 2 kilns, fired alternately. Lime at that time sold for $1.50 per barrel wholesale, $2 retail. Originally, most of the lime workers were Irish, but by the end of the 1800s, the work was dominated by immigrants from Italy and the Azores. It was tough work, and many of the men only stayed a few years before finding something better. Others eventually returned to their homeland. The IXL Lime Company faced a number of challenges during the 1880s and early 1890s, as you can see from this list. In 1893, the immense lime warehouse of the company in Felton was destroyed by fire. The company lost tools, staves, and 2,300 barrels of lime. The workers didn't always get along, as seen in this newspaper clipping from 1889. The sheriff ended up arresting several of the workers. By the middle 1890s, the IXL Lime Company was not doing well. There was a financial panic in 1893, a railroad strike, and its warehouse burned down. By 1894, the IXL Company was in financial trouble and unable to pay all its debts. Some lime continued to be made there, however, until about 1898. In 1900, Henry Cowell purchased the lime works. He purchased a number of smaller lime companies over the years. This map from 1926 shows the land purchased by Cowell as part of the deal. Altogether, it was about 2,300 acres. This is basically the outline of the state park land today. In 1906, under the leadership of Ernest Cowell, the lime works was renovated, according to a newspaper article at that time. This could well be when the current lime kilns were constructed. This photograph is one of the very few that shows the actual IXL lime works, probably from the early 1900s after it was owned by Cowell. You can see a large roof over the area in front of the kilns where the workers would be packing up the lime. You can see some lime barrels under the roof, and on the far left you can see the cooperage building. Here we see a close-up of one of the kilns today. There are 3 kilns, identical in size, so this is quite different from the original kilns where one was large and one was small. Also, the kilns are the exact same style as those built by Cowell at other facilities, including at the entrance to the UCSC campus. This shows the interior of one of the kilns at Fall Creek. The kiln was originally lined with fire brick. This 1950 photograph shows the kilns at the entrance to what is now the UCSC campus. They give one a pretty good idea of what the Fall Creek kilns looked like at one time. The lime kilns in the northern part of Wilder Ranch State Park were also built by Cowell, and they are of the same design and size as the ones at Fall Creek and UC Santa Cruz. This close-up of one of the doorways shows the fire bricks that were used to line the doorways and also the interior of the kiln. The bricks at these and other kilns were imported as ship's ballast from northern England. Fire bricks are made from special clays and are designed to withstand high temperatures. Most have the maker's name stamped in them. This one was made by the Snowball Company, so called because it was founded by Mr. James Snowball. This photograph shows a later warehouse, probably from the early 1900s. It was located in Felton, and you can see the large number of empty lime barrels piled up next to it. In 1915, under the leadership of Samuel Henry Cowell, a new mill was built farther up Fall Creek for making barrel staves and barrel heads. Even after the kilns shut down, the barrel parts were hauled to Cowell's plant at Rincon, closer to Santa Cruz, for assembly into barrels. This diagram by Bob Pawarzik shows how the barrel mill worked. It was entirely powered by water. The water turned a wheel which then operated the machinery, including a special saw for cutting the barrel staves. This diagram shows the type of stave saw that was used at Cowell's barrel mill. This photograph from the early 1920s shows two little girls posing next to a stack of barrel heads at Fall Creek. Apparently, in 1916, a motion picture was shot on Fall Creek by the Ince Company. Quite a few silent films were shot in Santa Cruz County in 1915 and 1916 during the very early period of the movie industry. It would be interesting to know if this film was ever made and if it still survives. In the 1920s and 1930s, according to newspaper accounts, Fall Creek was a popular area for hikers. Samuel Henry Cowell loved nature and not only made the area available for hikers, but he also allowed the Boy Scouts to set up camps on some of his land nearby. This is one of the few known photographs of Samuel Henry Cowell, the last surviving member of the Cowell family. In 1955, he died, but before he died, he established the S.H. Cowell Foundation, which still exists and gives out grants to various social programs. In 1972, the S.H. Cowell Foundation donated the land at Fall Creek to the California State Parks. It opened in 1976 as a unit of Henry Cowell Redwoods State Park, furthering the work of Samuel Henry Cowell. I would like to conclude by thanking the many institutions and individuals who, through the years, have made available photographs and other illustrations that could be included in this work. People sometimes ask, in doing historical research, how did you find all that information? Well, you have to dig, and there are lots of different sources. A lot of the information for this talk came from old newspapers, but some also came from census records, maps, deeds, incorporation papers, business directories, oral histories, books and periodicals, and various other sources. People interested in learning more about the history of the lime industry in Santa Cruz County are urged to check out the book Lime Kiln Legacies. It is available in various museums, park visitor centers, and in libraries in Santa Cruz County. Sales of the book benefit the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. If you have not been to Fall Creek, I would certainly urge you to go hiking there sometime. It is well worth a visit, especially if you have never been there before. In this talk, I have focused mostly on the human history of the park, but its natural features are every bit as interesting.